You are welcome to the Messiah channel. This is an end time channel. For members who are already subscribed, I congratulate you and I encourage you to remain with the channel. If you are a new subscriber, you are also welcome. We focus on end time events. Today, I found it important to discuss the military coup that occurred in Niger in July 2023. So we are focusing on the military coup. As you are aware, there was a coup d'etat in Niger, which is an African nation in the middle of Africa, a former colony of France. And what I think is going on in Africa and globally. There was a coup in Niger, as you are aware. Niger was a former colony of France, and France has had a humiliating defeat as four of her former colonies have experienced a coup d'etat. We have Niger. You also had Mali. You had Burkina Faso and Central African Republic. These nations were formerly French colonies, and France has remained very close to her former colonies as a result of new colonial agreements that France signed with the former colonies. Why is Niger important? Niger is important because, like most African nations, Niger has resources that is needed by the major powers in the world. I believe Niger ranks among the first 7 nations when it comes to uranium resources. Uranium is a resource that is important for the production of nuclear weapons. So you agree with me that Niger possesses a strategic material, and for some of the strategic materials, one important thing is that you either find them in Africa or you find them in Russia, former Soviet Union. So it makes Africa very strategic. If you're talking about Congo, Congo has a lot of resources where if you don't get them in Congo, you will have to go to Russia to get them. So Niger is strategically important, being the location where we have a strategic material, uranium, and Niger ranking within the first 7 nations when we're talking about uranium resources that is needed by the major powers, particularly for energy and also for weapons. Niger, as a former colony of France, also is responsible for 40% of French energy needs, electricity needs. It's estimated that 40% of France's electricity supply is based upon uranium from Niger. 40%. And I will give you 2 quotes from French leaders. And one of them is Jacques Chirac. And Jacques Chirac is saying that without the African nations, without exploiting the African nations, France will be a 3rd world nation. That's what a former president of France said, Jacques Chirac. He said that if you take Africa away from France, France will be a third world nation. And I know the reason why he's saying that. As a result of new colonial policies, France signed exploitative agreement with her colonies to the point that the colonies are supporting France to the point of 500 billion US dollars. And the former French colonies are still financing France. And according to an exploitative agreement that France signed with the former colonies were required to put 85% of their reserves currency in the Bank of France. 85% of the African countries, 85% of their reserves were to be deposited in French bank. For what reason? For France to use. That is an exploitation. And so the French countries, French-speaking countries, the Francophone countries, are indirectly developing France while underdeveloping themselves. And the case is similar to what happened to Haiti. If you read Haiti's history, France exploited them, and France imposed taxes on them, and looted the Haiti treasury, and the money from Haiti was used to build resources in France, and France developed as Haiti underdeveloped. And we are not only talking about France, we're also talking about other nations in Europe that profited from their colonies, particularly in Africa. But France is very notorious when it comes to neo-colonialism. And I've cited the case of Haiti, what France did to Haiti, exploited the Haitians, and imposed debt on the Haitians. In other words, the Haitians were paying reparations to France instead of France paying reparation to Haiti for colonizing Haiti and stealing resources from Haiti. Something happened at the time of independence, quote unquote, independence of the Francophone countries. There was a referendum, and the referendum asked a question. The question is, will you want to be independent, or you still want to associate with France even when you get their independence? That was a question. All the Francophone African countries said, yes, we want to associate with France even when we get independence. It was only one country that said, no, we want total independence. We don't want to associate with France. And that country was Guinea. And that was during the time of President Ahmed Sékou Touré. Sékou Touré was a wise man. He was not a puppet of France. So he said, no, Guinea want total independence. Do you know what France did? Because Guinea said no to France, France took everything that they brought to Guinea. They took it away. They destroyed Guinea so that Guinea would not be able to rule herself. And they took everything away, including typewriters. A typewriter. French took their typewriters away. At that time, they were using typewriters. They were not using computers. If they were using computers, they would have taken their computers away. The France took everything away from Guinea, including typewriters. And at that time, the president of Ghana, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, decided to give a loan aid, 10 million British pounds sterling to Guinea, for Guinea to stand on her own, for Guinea to wean herself from French colonial and imperialist rule. And so that's France for you. France is the European nation that forged the most neo-colonial links with her colonies. When we're talking about exploitation, I wouldn't say any European nation was better, but I believe that France exploited her colonies more than any other European powers. If you're talking about Portugal, Portugal did not want to give independence to her colonies at all. Portugal didn't want her colonies to be independent, Mozambique and Angola. That's why these two nations went through wars, national liberation, violent wars to get independence from Portugal, because Portugal considered the nations as part of Portugal. For France, France gave independence to her colonies, but it was a partial independence. It was what Kwame Nkrumah called neo-colonialism. After giving independence to the colonies, France still associated her colonies with France, and the French colonies, former colonies, spent French money. And there was a time that common water was imported from France, an African nation, Togo, importing drinking water from France. Not only that, there was a time that if you were in Ghana and you were making a call to Togo, Togo is the nation bordering Ghana to the east. It's a French nation. If you are in Ghana, you are making a call to Togo, the call will go through London, and then London will reroute the call to Paris in France, and then the call will come to Togo. It was the divide and rule tactics that the European powers used to divide and rule Africa, and also to make sure that British colonies will not interact with French colonies. So if you take Ghana as an example, Ghana is surrounded by Cote d'Ivoire, a French-speaking country, Burkina Faso, a French-speaking country, and Togo, a French-speaking country. And as a part of European plot, the British and the French made it impossible for the African nations to interact among themselves. That's why Nkrumah said that there should be African continental market, and Africans should trade among themselves and form an African economic union. Because he was very wise, because Nkrumah was very wise, he knew the new colonialist pretensions of the Europeans. Because he was wise, he was toppled, and he was toppled in 1966. In 1965, there was a special NATO meeting on Nkrumah, and they considered Nkrumah as a threat to European interests in Africa. France has interfered with the affairs of her colonies so many times, and has instigated coup d'etats in the French-speaking countries, whether you're talking about Niger, talking about Burkina Faso, talking about Mali. And now the Francophone countries are becoming awakened, and that's why they are saying no to France. So in Mali, the government had decided to use Mosi as their native language instead of using French. As a result of French neo-colonial policies, all the French colonies had to speak French. They also had to use the French currency, the CFA, and they also had to be part of the European Union. France associated colonies with the European Union as associate members of the European Union. And that was at the time when the West Africans were trying to bring an economic integration. Nigeria was leading the West African nation to form ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, in 1975. And France decided to reorient the Francophone countries to Europe. That's why France decided to associate the French-speaking countries with Europe as associate members. So we will spend 20 hours talking about French neo-colonial policies. We are talking about Niger, and Niger is a signal that the times of the Gentiles are up. The African nations are beginning to realize that they will not benefit from French neo-colonialism, and they are cutting ties with France. And Russia is taking advantage. It's taking advantage because if you see the coup that happened in Niger, the the people jubilating they were hosting, they were holding Russian national flags. And what is happening is that the time of the Gentiles are up. The European powers, their day of reckoning is coming as African nations rethink their relationship with the West. They've seen that the West has exploited them for a long time. $500 billion paid to the French and the Francophone countries putting 85% of their reserves, currency reserve, in French banks, and also giving French companies the first choice when it comes to investment. So if you go to a country like Ivory Coast, most of the companies in Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire were owned by France. And definitely, of course, I'm not saying any European power is more benevolent than the other, but I would say that France probably was more exploitative than Britain when it comes to her colonies. That's why mostly the English colonies and Britain got their independence in a more voluntary way. Of course, they fought for their independence. You remember the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya and also the independence struggle in Ghana. But the French didn't want the colonies to go away. France still wanted the colonies to be part of France. The coup in Niger is a day of reckoning for France because France is being defeated diplomatically and politically. The Francophone countries are weaning themselves away from economic dependence on France. And we see that China and Russia are taking advantage, and the Western powers actually they are panicking. They are panicking because their neo-colonial policies in Africa is coming to an end, and they are panicking because they used to engage in the strategy of destabilizing Africa, and the destabilization allowed them to steal resources from the African nations. And so you saw in Sierra Leone, they couldn't take diamonds from Sierra Leone, but when there was a civil war in Sierra Leone, then they gave them cover to take diamonds, blood, diamonds from Sierra Leone. In the case of Congo, when Congo was destabilized, then it allowed the foreign powers to take uranium, take gold, cobalt, and copper, and all kinds of strategic materials from Congo. And Niger is saying, no, we are not going to play the old game. We are wise. We are telling you to go away. And the West African nations who are playing to the tune, they are dancing to the tune of the West. They are threatening economic embargo on Niger. They are also threatening military intervention in Niger. But what I would say is that he who lives in a glass house should not throw stones. The ECOWAS leaders who are corrupt, they have to realize that it's corruption that is killing the African nations, the African proletariats, or the downtrodden, the ordinary workers, the wretched with the F. They are awakening to fight for their rights, and this is what is happening in Niger. Um, According to the United Nations, in the first 6 months of 2023, there were 1,800 instances of terror activities in West Africa. And so I will conclude by saying that the European powers are destabilizing Africa, particularly West Africa, for their own interests. But the time of the Gentiles will be up. The time when the European powers trample upon African lands will be up. The African nations will be awakened, and the West is seeing rebalancing of global power. And so now they are shocked to see Russian flags being waged in Niger, a country that was considered to be part of France. And this is the end times. Anything can happen. And when you see all these nations, wars and rumors of war, nations rising against nations and powers rising against powers, as China and Russia are doing in Africa, rising against the Western powers, you know that we are in the era of prophecy. We are very close to the coming of the Messiah. And so, if you have not repented, this is the time for you to do so. I'm leaving the links to the video in the description box, and I welcome you to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for this message.